What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Medieval folklore. Medieval folklore is a body of work, originally transmitted orally, which was composed between the 5th and 15th centuries in Europe. Although folk tales are a common attribute of every civilization, and such stories were being told by cultures around the world during the medieval period, the phrase medieval folklore in the West almost always refers to European tales. The word folklore was coined in 1846 by the British writer William John Toms to replace the more awkward phrase popular antiquities, which designated the stories, fables, proverbs, ballads, and legends of the common people. In time, folk tales were written down and became static, but originally they were dynamic and ever-changing stories passed from one generation to the next and moving between cultures as merchants carried the tales to other countries through trade. The performance of a tale, in fact, is considered integral to the very definition of a folk tale. Today there are standard versions of folk tales, as well as numerous variations on those standards, which are studied by folklorists in an effort to better understand the culture that produced them. Folk tales from the Near East and Asia were transmitted orally to Europe via trade through the Silk Road, which accounts for some of these variations. Further changes to an original story are the result of storytellers embellishing upon a tale for a particular audience. The folk tale continues to be a popular medium of entertainment in the present day and has been mined by film and television companies, as well as modern-day authors, for source material. Types of folklore. Tales composed or at least popularly transmitted in Europe between c. 476, the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and 1453, the fall of the Eastern Byzantine Empire, are considered medieval folklore. Christopher R. A scholar Fee defines the term in general. Folklore refers to cultural items common to a particular community. Such items may include stories, rituals, dances, songs, or any other aspect of life in that community that is imbued with some measure of shared experience, wisdom, or fundamental belief. In addition, the process of passing on this shared community knowledge or tradition is included in folklore. Unlike literature, which is a written body of work transmitted by an author to a literate audience, folklore is conveyed orally and the storyteller is free to embellish on the tale for a particular audience. In point of fact, the very definition of a folk tale includes the telling of a story. As these stories were told and traveled between cultures, discernible motifs developed which were finally analyzed and catalogued by folklorists of the 19th century such as Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, who wrote them down. As these tales became written literature, and different versions of a tale could be compared on a page, standard versions were established which correlated to various others. The story of a young girl who is victimized by her evil stepmother and stepsisters, for example, is not unique to the Cinderella story but shares that motif with many other stories. The wide variation in these stories was of central interest to folklorists in the 19th century, who were tracing the development of folklore in general and certain stories specifically. In 1910, the folklorist Antti Arn developed a classification system to make the study of these tales easier. This system was then revised by another folklorist, Stith Thompson, in 1928, and again in 1961. There were 3 categories in the Arn-Thompson Index known as out of the types of folklore: animal stories, ordinary folk tales, anecdotes, and jokes. In 2004, the Arn-Thompson Index was revised by folklorist Hans-Georg Uther, who expanded the branches of the index to delineate the categories further and expanded the definition of medieval folklore to include cultures beyond Europe. Today, the Arn-Thompson Uther Index (ATU) categorizes folk tales into 7 distinct groups: animal tales, magical tales, religious tales, realistic tales, stories about the dumb ogre, giant, or devil, anecdotes and jokes, formula tales. A number, such as ATU 101, is given to each folktale for comparison purposes. It should be remembered, however, as Fee points out, that folklore applies not only to tales but to any aspect of a culture that is transmitted orally, and can equally apply to techniques and methods in leatherworking or metallurgy or dressmaking as to legends, ballads, and proverbs. Nevertheless, stories that fall into or are close to one of the 7 ATU index categories are typically referred to by this term. Further, because folk tales were so fluid in composition and performance, these categories should be understood as approximations. A so-called formula tale could have major religious or magical elements, and might as easily be a religious tale or a tale of magic, except that it follows a discernible formulaic pattern. A character insists that one thing must happen before something else can happen, and so on. An animal tale, likewise, might have a religious message, but since the principal characters are non-human, it is not categorized as a religious tale. Animal tales. Animal tales are best known from the fables of Aesop. Aesop's fables were already a popular entertainment before they were collected and published by William Caxton in 1484, and many of the most popular motifs were reworked by medieval European storytellers. Among these is the story of the faithful dog who will not betray his master, epitomized in the story known as Old Sultan Atu 101, collected by the Grimm brothers in 1812. Old Sultan still remains faithful, even to the point of refusing a favor to the friend who helped him. The old dog Sultan hears his master tell his wife how, the next day, he plans on killing the dog because he is no longer useful. Sultan wanders into the woods where he meets his friend the wolf and explains his problem. The wolf proposes a plan in which he will come and snatch the couple's babe and Sultan will save it. The plan works perfectly and Sultan is saved. His master swears he can live there comfortably forever. A few days later, the wolf comes by and tells Sultan he will just be taking a stray sheep or so, and the dog should not mind, but Sultan refuses and protects his master's interests. The wolf is upset and challenges the dog to a fight to settle the debt, but, in the end, realizes that what Sultan did was right. The moral of the story is the value of personal integrity highlighted by the dog's faithfulness, the farmer's initial ingratitude, and the debt the dog owes to the wolf. Even though the farmer might not be worthy of the dog's loyalty, Old Sultan still remains faithful, even to the point of refusing a favor to the friend who helped him. Tales of magic. The fairy tale is categorized as a tale of magic, and always has some supernatural element to the plot. In German, the language of the primary folklorists of the 19th century, they were known as Zaubermärchen wonder tales. As noted, many folktales could fit into two or more of a folklorist's categories, and many tales rely on supernatural characters or events to work. Fairy tales, however, require the supernatural, usually in the form of a charm, an enchanted animal or object, or a spirit, in order to work at all. In a religious tale, Jesus or another divine figure might appear, but the story could work as well without the visitation. In a tale of magic, a supernatural encounter is vital to the plot. An example of this is the tale of the white snake Atu 673, in which a handsome and faithful servant of the king eats a tiny bit of a small white snake and can then understand the language of the animals. This new gift comes in handy throughout the rest of the story, in which he finds the queen's ring and is able to marry a beautiful princess, all because he can understand animals. He makes friends throughout the story by helping various animals when he hears them complaining about their circumstances. A young hero of high or low birth who must fight for or rescue a princess or noble maiden is frequently the focus of the fairy tale. Conversely, they feature the young woman as the main character who must be rescued, famously Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. The earliest versions of these tales frequently have a darker tone than the more common versions that are now well known. In Cinderella, for example, the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet to fit them into the glass slipper and, in one version, are then condemned to dance themselves to death. In Sleeping Beauty, the heroine is raped by a king who then abandons her to return to his queen, who, eventually, tries to murder Beauty's twin children to feed their corpses to her wayward husband. However, the plot is manipulated. The featured couple winds up married and living together happily afterwards. Religious tales. The same cannot be said for religious tales which, in medieval folklore, always have a strong Christian moral and frequently turn out badly for the main character. The opening line of religious tales typically begins, "In those days when our Lord and Saint Peter wandered upon the earth," instead of the better-known "once upon a time," but, instead of placing the action in a biblical setting, the story always features contemporary elements of the Middle Ages. A popular setting is a blacksmith shop which Jesus and Peter visit on their travels and perform some miracle out of the goodness of their hearts, which the self-serving blacksmith will later try to replicate with disastrous results. Another popular setting is the lone man or woman, of any occupation, who are tested by Jesus and Peter and fail spectacularly. An example of this is Gertrude's Bird Atu 751a, in which a woman named Gertrude, recognized by a spot of red in her hair, is visited by Jesus and Peter, who arrive at her house while she is baking and ask for food. As Gertrude rolls out the dough, she finds the loaf it makes is too large and decreases it bit by bit until she realizes anything she has is too much to give and tells the strangers to move along. Jesus becomes enraged and curses her for being so greedy. He changes her into a bird who must seek her food by pecking for it in dead trees and only getting water when it rains. The story explains the origin of the woodpecker as well as warning against the dangers of greed and refusing to offer hospitality to guests. Realistic tales. Realistic tales also have a Christian moral and are often reworked versions of famous parables from the Bible, such as the prodigal son, the unjust servant, the rich fool, among others. Many of the so-called realistic tales emphasize how people get what they deserve either through divine or supernatural intervention, their own goodness and intelligence, or an evildoer's carelessness and stupidity. One example of this is The Robber Bridegroom ATU 955, in which a virtuous young woman is unwittingly betrothed to a cannibalistic criminal. The miller of a small town agrees to give his beautiful daughter in marriage to a promising young stranger who seems to be of good breeding. The bridegroom invites the maiden alone to his cottage in the woods after courting her for a few months. When she arrives at the house, no one is home but an old woman in the basement who tells her she should never have come because her bridegroom regularly tricks young women to his cottage where he robs, kills, and then eats them. It is too late now for the maiden to escape, but the old woman tells her to hide and she will later rescue her. Soon after, the robber bridegroom and his men come in with another young woman they rob and chop into pieces. A ring-bearing finger of the woman is accidentally thrown across the room, landing behind a cask where the maiden is hiding. One of the robbers gets up to get the finger, but the old woman coaxes him back to the table, and then puts them all to sleep through a potion she slips into the stew. The elderly women and the maiden escape the cottage and safely return home. Later at the wedding feast, everyone is invited to tell stories. The maiden tells the story of her night in the bridegroom's cottage and shows the ring on her severed finger as evidence. The bridegroom is arrested and he and his men are condemned and executed. Stories of the foolish ogre, any tale in which the hero or heroine outwits a powerful supernatural being, such as a witch, sorcerer, giant, or the devil, is included in the category of tales of the stupid ogre. Among the best-known motifs is the clever good man who outwits the devil, which serves as the basis for the 1824 short story The Devil and Tom Walker by Washington Irving, which inspired the later, and better-known, story by Stephen Vincent Benet, The Devil and Daniel Webster in 1936. Typical of this type is the story of Roland and the Maiden ATU 1119, in which a good young maiden is forced to live with her wicked stepmother and stepsister who are witches. The stepmother plans to kill the maiden, but the maiden tricks her into killing the stepsister, and then flees with her friend and protector Roland. The couple are pursued by the witch, who almost catches them twice, but each time, the maiden is able to disguise them until Roland, in the form of a magical musician, plays a tune the witch has to dance to until she dies. After further adventures, the couple eventually happily marry. Anecdotes and jokes. While the happy marriage is the natural end of many stupid ogre tales, the opposite is true of anecdotes and jokes, which frequently make fun of unhappy couples and clumsy affairs. One of these tales, Tom Tutherhouse ATU 1725, is typical in that it deals with a deaf husband, his unfaithful wife, a servant boy, and Tom, the neighbor who can't stop going to the other house on his road. The servant boy wagers $10 that he will force the housewife to openly confess that she has been having an affair with Tom Tutherhouse for some time. She accepts the wager, and the boy sets trap after trap to frustrate and derail their relationship. He finally tricks Tom Tutherhouse into believing the husband knows of the affair and is coming with an axe to kill him, while, at the same time, telling the husband that Tom needs him to come over with his axe and fix Tom's plow. Tom sees him with the axe and runs away, and the wife, seeing her husband bending down to pick up some pieces of bread the serving boy has left out in the yard, thinks he's gathering rocks to stone her and confesses. Formula tales. Formula tales mostly follow a pattern in which a character gets into trouble and needs help but cannot receive it until a series of conditions, stipulated one after another by other characters, are met. In the story of The Death of Little Hen ATU 2021, for example, a hen and a cock go out to the nut hill to eat after agreeing to share whatever they find. The hen finds a large nut and eats it without thinking of the cock, and it becomes lodged in her throat. She calls out to the cock to run to the well to get water, but, when he gets there, the well will give him no water unless he gets some thread from a nearby bride. The bride will not surrender the thread unless the cock first gets her a wreath from the willow. The willow will not comply until its condition is met, and so on. By the time the cock returns to the hen, she has choked to death, and the same pattern, more or less, then repeats itself regarding her funeral procession. Formula tales most likely inspired the type of folk tune known as a cumulative song, in which each verse builds on the previous one until an entire tale is told. The best-known examples of cumulative songs in the modern day are 12 Days of Christmas, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, and Hole in the Bottom of the Sea, among others. Conclusion. The underlying form of all folk tales, no matter how they are categorized and defined, is shared experience. Because its themes are universal, folklore endures throughout history. The stupid ogre type of tale touches on people in power trying to exploit those weaker than they are and failing. The formula tale relies on the communal understanding of the importance of working together and keeping one's word. Religious tales and realistic tales both serve similar purposes by highlighting the common understanding of morality and justice, as well as providing memorable examples of what can occur when one deviates from the accepted norm. In a largely illiterate society, medieval folklore entertained while teaching the most important values of the community. Folklorists who have made these tales their life's work are able to understand what a society was like, and what the people considered important based on the kinds of folk tales they told, as well as which stories were borrowed and then kept from other cultures. Folk tales have the ability to instantly engage an audience and clearly convey their message, regardless of the genre in which they fall. Medieval folklore. The living tapestry of European oral tradition. Medieval folklore represents one of the richest and most enduring cultural legacies of Europe, spanning from the fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 CE, to the twilight of the Middle Ages, 15th century. Unlike formal literature, which was preserved in manuscripts by monastic scribes, folklore thrived in the oral traditions of peasants, merchants, and minstrels, passed down through generations in taverns, marketplaces, and hearthside gatherings. These stories, ranging from enchanted fairy tales to cautionary fables, were not static relics but living narratives, constantly reshaped by storytellers to reflect the fears, hopes, and moral codes of their communities. The study of medieval folklore reveals a world where witches lurked in forests, dragons guarded hoards of gold, and cunning peasants outwitted kings. But these stories were more than just entertainment. They were also used as social instruction, psychological release, and covert resistance against the feudal society's rigid hierarchies. The nature of medieval folklore. Oral tradition versus written literature. Dynamic performance. Unlike fixed texts, folktales were improvised, each telling adapted to the audience. When merchants take a tale from a German village to France, it might change. Transmission routes. Many stories brought Middle Eastern and Asian themes and local customs to Europe via the Silk Road. The role of the storyteller. Bards, minstrels, and grandmothers were the keepers of lore, using repetition, song, and gesture to enhance their tales. Folktale classification in the 19th century. Folklorists like the Brothers Grimm and Auntie Arne sought to categorize these fluid narratives. The Arne-Thompson-Euther ATU Index now sorts medieval folklore into 7 broad types. Animal tales, g. Aesop's fables, Reynard the Fox. Tales of magic, fairy tales like Cinderella, Snow White. Religious stories, miracles, legends about saints. Realistic tales, moralistic stories of clever peasants. Tales of the stupid ogre, giants, devils outwitted by humans. Anecdotes and jokes, humorous, often bawdy tales. Formula tales, repetitive, rhythmic stories like the house that Jack built. Key themes in medieval folklore. 1. Morality in animal tales. Feather and fur animal fables, inherited from Aesop, were medieval Europe's moral compass. Old Sultan, Edu 101. A loyal dog saves his master's child but refuses to betray him, even when tempted by a wolf. Reynard the Fox. A trickster whose slyness mocked the hypocrisy of nobles and clergy. Why mammals? Anthropomorphism allowed peasants to critique authority without direct defiance. Familiar creatures, foxes, wolves, dogs, symbolized human traits: cunning, greed, loyalty. 2. Tales of magic, enchantment and social subversion. Fairy tales, Zaubermärchen, were not for children. They were dark, symbolic, and often brutal. Cinderella, ATU 510AA, persecuted maiden's rise, often with violent stepsister mutilation in early versions. Snow White, ATU 709, jealousy, poisoned apples, and resurrection themes echoed medieval witchcraft fears. A cautionary tale about marital control and curiosity is Bluebeard, ATU 312. Hidden meanings. Spinning straw into gold, Rumpelstiltskin, symbolized the exploitation of peasant labor. Animal brides/grooms, Beauty and the Beast, reflected arranged marriages. 3. Religious tales. Saints, devils, and divine justice. Medieval Christianity permeated folklore, but not always piously. The Devil's Contracts. Tales of fools trading souls for wealth, only to outwit Satan, e.g. the Smith and the Devil. Saints' miracles. George's dragon-slaying mirrored Christian triumph over paganism. Purgatorial ghosts. Returning spirits seeking redemption, prefiguring a Christmas carol. 4. Realistic tales. The cunning peasant. In a world of serfdom, folklore celebrated underdog ingenuity. The clever peasant girl. ATU 875, a low-born woman outsmarts a king with riddles. Till Eulenspiegel, a prankster whose tricks mocked the greed of merchants and clergy. Why are these tales told? Wish fulfillment for oppressed peasants. Covert resistance. Laughter as rebellion. 5. The stupid ogre. Giants, trolls, and human folly. Ogres embodied natural disasters, foreign invaders, or brute nobility. Jack the Giant Killer. A peasant boy defeats monstrous oppressors. The Three Billy Goats Gruff depicts peasant defiance as small heroes who triumph over a troll. 6. Anecdotes and jokes. The body underbelly. Medieval humor was earthy and irreverent. The Miller's Tale. Chaucer adultery, flatulence, and comeuppance.